Hi, this is John Lee, and thanks for tuning in to Synfig tutorial number 5, Animating Shapes. And here's a preview of the animation that we'll be creating in today's tutorial. It's a plant that gradually blooms into a flower. And if you want to follow along on the Synfig website, just head over to www.synfig.org, click on Documentation on the main page, then click on Manual, and under the Diving In chapter, click on Animating Shapes. And here's today's tutorial in text format. Alright, so the first thing we want to do is set up our project settings. Click on the caret menu button, choose Edit, and then choose Properties. And in Properties, select the Time tab and change your end time to 6 seconds, 6S. And then make sure your frames per second is set to 24 frames per second. Then click OK. And the first thing we'll do is draw out our background using the gradient tool. So you can select that in the toolbox on the upper left corner. Let's also select our colors for our background for the gradient. So I'm going to click on the palette editor over here. The first color I'll choose is this tan beige color, and then I'll swap the fill and outline colors and change this black fill color to this shade of green. With those two colors selected, I will draw out the gradient layer by clicking at the top of the canvas, dragging my mouse down, and here we are. It fills in the entire canvas with the two colors that we picked. And the next thing I want to do is just tweak this gradient color just a little bit so that we have more green filling up the canvas. Alright, and the next thing we'll do is draw out our first shape. Click on the spline tool, and in the spline tool options panel, make sure you have create region checked off, and every other option unchecked. Once you've done that, head over to your canvas, draw out your first object. We're going to draw a basic triangle shape at the bottom middle of our canvas, and then once you've plotted out your triangle, head over to the first point, right click and choose loop spline. That closes out the shape. And then you can click on the execute button here underneath the spline tool panel. Once you've done that, you have our green shape. Now I actually want to change this green to a darker shade. So what I'm going to do is click on the paint tool bucket, change this green to a darker shade, and then click on the shape. And there we go. Also, I want to rename this new layer to stem. Now right now this doesn't look like a stem, and in fact it doesn't even look very organic, so we're going to fix that by pulling out the bezier handles for each point. And you do that by clicking on your transform tool, hover over each vector point that describes our shape until it turns yellow, and then left click and drag your mouse in any direction. And you'll see the bezier handles start to appear. Do the same for the other 2 points. And once again. Now right now the bezier handles are joined together. I want to break them in half. So to do that, I'm going to click on each vector point and choose right click on with my mouse and choose split tangents. Right click, split tangents, right click, split tangents for all three. This gives us a little more control of our artwork. So I want the bottom half of this shape to be completely horizontal and flat so that it looks like it's sitting on the ground. And these two bezier handles on the side, I'll just have them point vertically. And this shape is fine. So right now it kind of looks like this little stump that's peeping out of the ground, which will eventually grow into a stem and a bud. Alright. That's pretty much all we need to do. And what I'm going to do is go to frame 0. Make sure your slider is on frame 0, and then click on my keyframe tab and choose add new keyframe to save all of the properties on frame 0. Next I'm going to go over to the 4.5 second mark, which is 4 seconds at 12 frames. If you remember, we have our project set to 24 frames per second, so half a second is 12 frames. So 4 seconds and 12 frames is 4.5 seconds. Then I'm going to head over to animate editing mode, and I'm going to change this shape into a stem and a bud. So I'm going to raise the first vector point up about this much. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can get a better look at this. And at the top of this stem shape, on the right side and on the left side, I'm going to add 2 new vector points in order to help create the shape of a bud. So I'm going to right click on the left side of the stem and choose Insert Item Smart. Then I'm going to click on the left side of the stem and again choose Insert Item Smart. So now we have 3 points to play with to create the shape of the bud. But before we go forward, I want to break these 2 bezier handles in half, just like we did with the other bezier handles. So again, right click on each point and choose Split Tangents. And now we're ready to create the shape of our bud. Let me just drag this over here. The top vector point of our bud. Have it pointing slightly in the direction of the right side of the screen. And move these 2 newly added points closer together to help create the shape of the bottom part of the bud. So there, that looks more like a bud now. Moving those top bezier handles. Let me just zoom out a little bit so you get a better look at our artwork. Okay, so that looks like a pretty decent looking bud. Now I want to help define the shape of the stem. Right now it's this sort of triangular vertical looking shape. I want it to look more like an S-shape stem. Looks a little more graceful and helps make it look a little more organic. So those 2 bottom bezier handles for the newly created points, I'm dragging it towards the left side of the screen. And at the bottom of the stem, I'm going to drag the bezier handles to the right side of the screen to create this S shape. So that looks pretty good. Let me just tweak the artwork a little bit more. There we go. It almost looks like that plant monster from Little Shop of Horrors. For those of you who haven't seen that movie, it's basically this giant plant monster that eats people, has a big mouth. Okay. Alright, so yeah, the sizes are a little bit exaggerated, like the bulb is a little too big, the base of the stem is really too thick, but I think for the purposes of clarity, I'm going to leave them at these exaggerated sizes, just so you get a better look at what I'm doing. Now, if you remember in a previous tutorial, I mentioned that Synfig basically morphs between two shapes. So if you remember on frame 0, we have the shape of this bulb that's sort of peeping out of the ground. And at the 4.5 second mark, we have this other shape, which looks like a stem and a bulb. Synfig morphs all of the in-between animations so that it looks like it's growing from this bulb state into this stem and bulb state. So let's just take a look and see how Synfig is handling this. Go back to frame 0, click play, and you'll see sure enough Synfig is animating between the beginning state and the end state. But the problem is the bulb is starting to appear from the beginning of the animation, and I don't want the bulb to appear until later on in the animation. So I'm going to go to the, let's see, we created our final stem and bulb at the 4.5 second mark. So now I'm going to go backwards at the 3.5 second mark and tell Synfig to start animating the bulb at this point in the timeline. So to do that, I'm going to click on our parameters tab, click on our stem layer, and then scroll down in the parameters tab where you get to vertices, open up the vertices tab, the vertices properties, so you get this list of all the different vertices. And you'll notice that the 2 points that we just created, the waypoints at the 4.5 second mark have a green horizontal line splitting the diamonds in half for these 2 points. Those are the two, that tells us those are the 2 newly added points. And if you also look in the parameters panel, you'll see a little keychain icon next to these 2 newly added points. It's just another marker that tells us these are 2 new points that weren't originally part of our artwork, that we added somewhere later down the timeline. So what I want to do is I want to turn off these 2 points, and I don't want them to turn on until the animation gets to the 3.5 second mark. And to do that, we'll select the first point and choose, right click and choose Mark Active Point as Off. That turns off that vector point at that point in the timeline. We'll do the same for the second vector point and turn it off. So now it's like these two vector points don't exist. From frame 0 to frame 3.5, these two vector points will not affect the shape of our animation. So the only points that we have left are the original vector points that we started out with. And we now have, the stem has now become this sort of formless blobby shape. I want to re-establish the shape of the stem using the top vector point of our bud, or the top vector point of what will eventually become our bud. And I'm going to drag these two bezier handles out to once again redefine the shape of our stem into this gracious S curve. So let's replay the animation and see what this did. Let's go back to frame 0. And let me just turn off those handles. And you'll see the bud sort of morphs into the stem shape, but then the bud at the top of the stem kind of has this weird transition. So we need to fix that. Select the stem layer. Let's go to our vertices properties and open the list. Now the reason why the bud is warping after the 3.5 second mark is because we have these two bezier handles all dragged all the way to the left side of our screen, and we did that to help establish the shape of our stem up to the 3.5 second mark. But after the 3.5 second mark, now we want these two bezier handles to help define the shape of our bulb, of our bud. So I'm going to take these two vector points of bezier handles and drag them all the way back near our top vector point. And what that does is it now fixes the transformation of our bud towards the end stage of our animation. So let's take a look and see what that did. Alright, let's get a better look at that without the handles in the way. Alright, so at the 3.5 second mark, that's when our bud starts to appear. Now I want to fix one more thing. The shape of the stem as it's going from 0 seconds to 3.5 seconds. It's still a little too blobby. I want to, somewhere at the half second mark, so that would be 12 frames, I want to adjust the shape of this blob so that it looks like it's beginning to become a graceful curve. So I adjusted the right bezier handle like so. Let me get rid of those handles. Go back to the beginning of the animation and see if this looks a little better. Okay. So now it's a little more improved. I think that's good enough for now. Alright, so now we're ready to add in our petals. But before we do that, get out of animate editing mode and go back to the green man non-animate editing mode. And now we're ready to create our artwork. Remember, you have to be in the turn off animate editing mode if you want to create artwork. Turn on animate editing mode when you want to animate artwork. So now we're ready to create artwork. We're going to be creating the petals. And before I do that, I want to choose a nice shade of pink. Alright, so this color is a little too dark. I'm going to left click on this fill color panel in the toolbox, and this window opens up. You'll see the red, green, and blue channels. All you have to do is play around with one of the sliders in any one of those channels to adjust your color. Once you get it to a color that you're okay with, close. And that's the shade of pink that we'll be working on for the petals. Now I'm ready to draw out my petals. I'm going to click on the spline tool this time. And again, make sure your create region is checked off and all the other options are not checked. Then click on anywhere on the canvas. That's our first vector point. Drag your mouse downwards. Create our second vector point. And then I'm going to drag my mouse back up. And this time right click back on top of the first vector point and choose loop spline. Now it doesn't quite look like a shape, it just looks like a line. But when you click on the transform tool and hover over any one of these vector points, just drag out the bezier handles and then you'll see the shape. You'll see the line start to take shape. like that. Let me zoom in a little bit. So hover your mouse over to the vector point until you see the green or the yellow bezier handle and just drag out. And once again, I want to break these bezier handles so that they move independently because I want the edges of the petals to be pointy and sharp instead of curved. So split tangents, and then just drag this vector point down, or the bezier handles down, so that the tips of the petals become a little pointier. And there we go. Now if you notice in the center of your screen you have a green button. This is the position handle. If you move the position handle around with your transform tool, it moves the artwork, all the artwork on this panel around as well. But what I want is, I want this green position handle within the petal. So to do that, you're going to select all the vector points of your petal. You can just drag a selection box around the petal using your transform tool, or alternatively, if you hit Control or Command on the Mac, Control or Command A, that automatically selects all the points as well. And once all the points are selected, click on one of the vector points, drag it over to the position button so that it's at the base of the petal like so. And once you've done that, let's go over to our petal layer, rename the petal layer Petal, and then I'm going to select the petal layer and the stem layer. To select both layers, click on the petal layer, then hold Control or Command on the Mac, and select the stem layer. And now we have both layers selected. Now with both layers selected, let's left click on your mouse over the position handle of the petal, and then hold down Control or Command on the Mac, and select the top vector point of the bud. So now the position handle, the green position handle is selected, and the top vector point of the bud is selected. Right click on any one of those points and choose Link. And what this will do is it will join both the position handle and the top vector point handle together. So now they're joined. And what this also does is anytime you move this top vector point, it moves the petal as well, because the position point of the petal is now linked to the top vector point of the bud. And what that does is, if you play back this animation, let's go back to the beginning frame. If I click play, notice that the petal follows along with the end point of the bud. You don't have to individually position this petal as the vine is growing, because the position handle of the bud is now linked to the top vector point of the bud. So now I want to fill in the rest of this flower with more petals. So let me zoom in. It's a little too close. And I'll reposition this petal a little bit, like so. And then I'll duplicate this petal, select the petal layer in the panel window, and choose Duplicate Layer. There's our second petal. Now I'm going to, with all the points selected, I'm going to rotate this petal slightly, like that. That looks good. I'm going to duplicate again, rotate this new petal layer again and reposition it, just so that we're filling out the rest of the petals to form this flower. Duplicate the layer again, rotate it, the rotate tool in your toolbox, and just position petal like so, and let's see, we'll create one more petal layer. Again, we'll rotate it with the rotate tool in our toolbox, and then reposition the petal with our transform tool, like so. And so every one of these petals is all linked. Their position handle is linked to the top edge of the bud, which means they will all move together as that top vector point of the bud moves. So let's see what that looks like. We'll go back to frame 0. Remember, we're in non-animate editing mode. There's got to be an easy way to say that. So all 5 petals are moving with the top vector point of the bud. But now we want, I don't want these petals to start appearing until after the let's say 3-second mark. No, 3.5 seconds. No, 4 seconds. We'll have the petals start appearing at the 4-second mark. So let's go into animate editing mode. And the first thing we'll do is go to the 5-second mark, because this is where the petals will be fully extended in their final position. I want to create a keyframe at the 5-second mark so that we save the petals exactly as they are at 5 seconds. Then we're going to go back to the 4-second mark and make the petals disappear. And there are a couple of ways we can do that. The way that I'm going to handle this is, first of all, I'm going to select all of the petal layers in our panel layer window and group them by right-clicking and then choose Group Layer. Or you can choose the Group Layer button here once you have all your petal layers highlighted. And I'm going to rename this group layer to Petal Group. Alright? And I'm doing this because we're starting to get more layers in our project, and I just want to keep things organized. So remember, Synfig creates a new layer for every single item, every single element of your project. So a lot of layers can be easily created while you're working on an animation, so you need to organize them whenever you can. So that's why we've grouped these petal layers into a group layer. And now I'm ready to go back to our 4-second marker. And what I'm going to do is select all the petal layers within this group layer and scale them down until you can't see them. So I'm going to click on the scale tool, drag the selection box around all of the points of the petals, and then just choose any one of these vector points and drag my mouse in. So it's shrinking the petals like so. And I'm going to reposition this miniature version of the petals towards the middle of the bud. So with the transform tool, I'm going to click on one of these vector points and just move it towards the center of our bud. Alright. So now from 4 seconds to 5 seconds, these petals will start to expand. Let me just not click on the gradient. So you can see they're slowly starting to grow out of the bud. And here at the 5-second mark, they're fully extended. Now let's head back to the beginning of our animation. Look what happened. The petals are fully extended, and that's because we created a keyframe on frame 0, so it remembers the fully extended state of our petals. And watch what happens when you click play. They start shrinking. And that's because at the 4-second mark, we shrunk the petals. So there are 2 ways that we can handle this. One, we can go back to frame 0 and shrink all of these petals again to hide them within the bud. And then we'd have to keep going through each frame of the animation to make sure that the petals aren't visible. The other and easier way that we're going to do this is to make these petals invisible. And to do that, I'm going to go all the way back to frame 0. So just make sure the cursor is at 0 frames, which is the 0-second marker on our timeline. And I'm going to turn off the visibility of these petals. So right now I'm going to collapse the group layer folder, select the petal group layer folder, and then go to our parameters tab in the parameters window. And under amount, the amount is the opacity or visibility of the object. So right now it's set to 1. 1 means it's fully visible, 0 means it's completely invisible. So I'm going to make sure I'm at the 0-second mark and change this value to 0. Hit enter. And there, the flowers are invisible. Now let's play back and see what happens. Right now we have another problem. Remember, Synfig morphs between 2 states. So right now at frame 0, we have the petals set to invisible, but at the 4-second mark, it's set to fully visible. Or actually, the 4-second mark, it's set to invisible. Well, it's actually morphing between the 0 frame and the 5-second mark. But at the 4-second mark, I want these petals to be fully visible. So I'm going to change this to 1. Alright, so it creates a keyframe. So from 0 frames to 4 seconds, the petals are slowly becoming invisible. Or slowly becoming visible, which is not what we want. We want these petals to be completely invisible from the 0-second marker to the 4-second marker of our timeline. And to do that, I'm going to go back to the 0-second mark of our timeline, right-click on the amount, and choose Edit Waypoint. And I want to draw your attention to the interpolation settings here. The in interpolation is set to clamped, the out interpolation is set to clamped, which means that the interpolation is gradually changing from one frame to another frame. I want to change the out interpolation to constant. And what that means is anything after this waypoint is going to stay, the value is going to stay constant until it hits the next waypoint, which is at the 4-second mark. So we set our visibility to 0. So now the visibility will stay 0 all the way through until it hits the 4-second mark, where the visibility is set back to 1. It'll be an instant change instead of a gradual change. So that's what we want. We set to constant for the out interpolation. And now let's see what happens. Oops, let me go back to the beginning of the animation. So here we are. Let me click play. So now you don't see the petals. The petals are invisible, but they start to appear at the 4-second mark, and then the petals fully extend up until 5 seconds. So that is our completed flower animation. Hope you found this helpful. Thanks for watching, and if you like this video, please click like and or subscribe, and I'll see you in a future video tutorial. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care.